So sorry, y'all are going to be sick of me by tomorrow afternoon, but I am having such a good time, so here I am. So I am thrilled to be moderating this panel where we're going to talk about what children need to be well, to feel grounded, to feel visible. And there's so much to be learned from Indigenous communities, from Indigenous cultures, and also so many resources that could be shared back to build capacity. So I wanted to start there. And I wanted to start with you, Deana. So you've talked about the importance of family and cultural grounding. And I think that's like a great place for us to lay the framework for this panel. Why is that so important? Why is that where you kind of center your work? And what are the learnings that can be passed on from that?
Thank you. Sio Deana Roundham Dawadoa. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, and I'm feeling a little bit nervous to be up here today, and I'm just going to name that because I'm also going to take a second and imagine my ancestors and my relatives and my family with me, and all those virtually I know that are sending good vibes and energy this way. This is a space that's uncomfortable because I think that the wisdom that we have in our communities is not wisdom that I uniquely hold, and I heard that in some of the panel presentations earlier today, that this is not new. A lot of what we're talking about doing is actually making space to uphold the knowledge and wisdom of our communities that's been systematically dismantled and disrupted over time and over centuries. And I think that creating a space where culture can be present and alive in the lives of our children and families, our Indigenous children and families, creates a space for healing. It creates a space for healing young people, our earliest and youngest citizens of our communities, our families. It gives Indigenous parents the opportunity to parent in ways that some of our communities have not been able to parent for generations. It creates a space for healing our Indigenous communities. We've had people who were systematically removed from our communities and didn't have the opportunity to fulfill the roles that their communities have said were important since time immemorial. They weren't able to fulfill those relational responsibilities to one another. So making space to have culture present in the lives of children and families in our Indigenous communities creates a space for healing. And that's not just healing for children, for families, for communities. It's healing for us as a nation. We have to have some of those conversations around the hard times and acknowledge that, but also lift up all of the benefits that come from recognizing and honoring that Indigenous wisdom. We're doing some work with the Tribal Early Childhood Research Center, and that's focused on early relational well-being and what are the practices that support that. We have to think about how we can measure that and use those practices to revitalize and sustain Indigenous cultures. And then the various places and systems that we can have that knowledge live in the places that touch children and families every day, from childcare to Head Start programs to the healthcare system, so that we are creating that opportunity to engage in protective and promotive cultural practices from the very earliest places of birth and pregnancy and thinking about starting a family to end-of-life care and making sure that we have those intergenerational responsibilities and roles fulfilled within our communities.
Yeah, Deana, that resonates with me so much, particularly this week. Folks who I talked to this morning know that I came here fresh from Montgomery, Alabama, where I was at the Legacy Museum. And when you said, that this healing, thinking about the ways that this country has dismantled and devalued cultural practices, family practices, for so many groups of people, particularly Indigenous people. For me, that just is resonating this week so much more after having been through that experience and thinking about all of the ways that families were separated and devalued and culture devalued, and how that plays into education, which, Joe, I want to come to you next, how that plays into education and the way that our children are educated, the way that they do or do not feel seen during their education, and what that does to them. And Joe, you've really centered so much of your work around that and thinking about the way that Indigenous practice should be and could be incorporated into that space. So can you talk to us about that?
Sure. So, Haumatakiwape, hello my relatives. I am Unkpapa Lakota. My Lakota name is Shukmanatu Tankase Tokiahiaye, which means he leads like a wolf. And yes, I think that the educational experience of our youth in Indian country is really tantamount to the survival of our culture and our ways. And I think where the experience that I have had in my journey professionally and personally is that there is a disconnect with an understanding of the history of Indian peoples here in North America, particularly in relationship to public education. For us, the system was never really designed to lift us up and empower us, and in fact, it was weaponized against us. And as we are going to continue to learn, there were several thousand of our youth that were killed in these North American concentration camps that have been given this saccharine term, boarding schools. And moving forward from there into the public realm, we still don't really see the inclusion of our histories and our perspectives, let alone our cultural practices and customs, present within these learning spaces. The two questions that I often get confronted with in my work, particularly from policymakers, the first is, why are so many Native Americans failing within public education? And we see in Minnesota, they're popping champagne corks off in the Department of Education because our graduation rates have gone north of 50% for 2 consecutive years. That's not good enough, and I believe we can do better, but I don't believe the system can do it. So my response to that first question is, they're not failing. They're making a spirit-conscious, saving decision to exit a very toxic environment that really was not intended to empower them. The second follow-up question is, then why is public education failing Native Americans? And my response to that is, from what I've learned, both personally and professionally in my own education, it was never designed to empower us. In fact, it's not failing, it's performing exactly as it was intended to perform, which really is predicated on creating kind of citizen widgets that will just plug and play and not really disrupt or create, let alone sustain, a differentiated cultural perspective. So out of that milieu came really incredible work in creating what is referred to as alternative schools that are culturally contextualized, that our customs, our practices, our perspectives are absolutely central to the overall functioning of that learning space. I happen to be a part of that in my career at American Indian NYC in Minneapolis, but then this became something much larger, and I would like to give a shout out to the National Urban Indian Family Coalition and Executive Director Janine Kaminote, who's here, an Ascend Fellow, empowered me to connect with other alternative schools. Yeah, give it up for Janine. This put me on a plane to meet these other schools that were doing remarkable work. Really, when we say culturally contextualized, it is an overwhelming and indelible impression the minute you walk into the front doors that this is an Indigenous school. From the customs that are on display to what's inculcated into the curriculum to learning across generations with our elders, it is omnipresent and it is working and is yielding the results that we'd like to see. Weirdly, when you validate the culture of your base constituency, they tend to want to attend that school a little more frequently. And when you have good attendance, we know from a pedagogical perspective, that is the tide that all boats will rise. We did this not because we thought it'd be fun, we did it because we were really confronted with an existential crisis. Our language is absolutely critical to the expressions of our customs and our practices, and in many communities, particularly in Lakota, our fluent language speakers are shuffling off this mortal coil at a rate that is really kind of frightening. So we have an impetus and an onus to really engage in a different way of doing school. When we look back to our compatriots that are in the mainstream K-12 system, I love them, God bless them, but we don't believe that they can achieve what we can achieve through what we do in these alternative settings. These schools thought that they'd been operating in isolation, and so really we've worked to stitching together a community of practice where we can support one another, and we see it as creating the fire escapes for people to then exit en masse from the established K-12 system, which from our perspective, the Indigenous perspective, has outlived its usefulness. It's time to let it go and create something new. And that was a challenge personally because, in my career, I always leaned into that, what new reform can we do? But, we've had 20 years of disaggregated data. The achievement gap isn't going away, and I think we're all done with public education reasserting its primacy to steer the next reform movement. It's not working. We're not interested. I don't really want to give up my spirit and my energy into a fool's errand. I'd rather create and do something new. So it's been a centerpiece of my career, and it's been incredibly exciting work to be a part of it, but it is a collaborative effort. These communities are all doing it themselves simultaneously.
Yeah, I want to come back to that. Jessica, I want to bring you in. You've done so much work around relationships, and so much of what both Joe and Deana just talked about, for me, centers around relationships and feeling seen, and feeling that deep connection with people who are part of your community, who you're trying to learn from, who you're trying to live with. Can you talk a little bit about why you've centered your work there, and the importance of this for growing this community and getting resources to this community?
Yeah, thank you. So when I was entering my PhD program at University of Washington, I went in thinking that I was going to be going in to study and learn more about historical trauma and adapting that framework to the Alaska Native context. My family's originally from Kingigan, the native village of Wales. I'm a tribal citizen of Nome Eskimo community. And I worked in the child welfare system for over 10 years, and I saw so much trauma and disconnect and how the system compounded that trauma, and I wanted to do something about that. And when I went into that program, I talked to tribal leaders and I talked to elders and community members about what I was thinking of studying. And they told me, and I'm so grateful they gave me this guidance, that we know a lot about trauma. We feel it, we're experiencing it. We're grateful for all of this knowledge and wisdom that's helping us better understand all these different aspects of trauma. But what we need to know is how to be healthy and well again. How do we support well-being of our community and of our children, of our families? What does well-being mean? Like, what does it take to do that, to heal? And I'm so grateful for that. That sent me on this journey to do a literature review. I focused on Indigenous well-being, and I came across this term connectedness in one of the articles that I read, and it was defined by the People's Awakening team of Southwest Alaska as the interrelated welfare of an individual, a family, a community, and the earth. And when I came across that concept and that definition, I knew right away, I was like, this is it. This is what's missing. This is what people are not applying or understanding in these policies and practices within these systems. We are instead instilling disconnectedness. We're normalizing separation. We're not looking through the lens of a child. We're looking at through the lens of adults and, individuals or nuclear families. And we're not seeing the bigger picture view. And so I interviewed Alaska Native knowledge bearers of the child welfare system. And one of the things in my interviews I was learning about was how important it is that we have these relationships so that we can know who we are and where we come from. So who we are is not just ourselves. Who we are is also our ancestors, our family, its spirit, its culture, its future generations, it's our community, not just a place, but all the social communities that we establish with each other. And when we know who we are and where we come from, when we get anchored in that, then I feel like that's a very powerful place to be. That's where we set boundaries, that's where we come in right relationships, that's where we shed all the false beliefs that many of these systems indoctrinate us with and try to assimilate us into believing we're someone we're not, where we're dehumanized, where we get disconnected from ourselves in many ways. So they were sharing with me a lot of wisdom about what helps with reconnecting. And what helps with reconnecting, as Deana was mentioning, was that was brought up time and time again, were all of our cultural practices. And I am starting to equate culture with the term spirit. All of our spiritual practices, our language, our naming ceremonies, our dances, our songs, our traditions, our ceremonies, our prayers, our connection with this beautiful earth. Like, we have a lot of disconnect going on. And I think we're all in a moment of time of figuring out how do we reconnect? How do we resist that disconnectedness and loneliness and all of these symptoms of disconnect and heal the gaps? How do we re-bridge ourselves internally and then with each other?
Yeah. Deana, I saw you still nodding very hard to all of that. I'm just wondering if you had anything to add.
Yeah, I think that, I'm a researcher. My training is in public health, and I have the appreciation of and gratitude to have been a classroom teacher, a science teacher. I've worked in many different spaces with lots of different communities, and we have the answers. I mean, we have the answers in our communities. We just need people to make space for us to lift up those answers and put those things into practice. I think that we have cultural practices that have maybe not been as alive and well in our communities as we would like them to be. We need allies and other people to stand up with us and say that this is important, and make sure that we have the resources flowing into our communities to sustain and revitalize some of these practices that haven't been as alive and well as we would like them to be. And we need those to take care of our communities first. There is a lot of benefit that can extend to other communities, and there is a lot of lessons that can be taken into other spaces, but we have 500 plus years of being disconnected, and we need those resources in our communities to help us heal, so that those lessons can extend elsewhere. And I think it's critical that we have, 3 Native PhDs up here. That's amazing. Yep. And in my career trajectory, I feel like an emerging scholar still myself, but in the last 10 years, I've seen some amazing training programs pop up and start to train the next generation of Indigenous scholars. And I think every time a Native young person can see someone like us in front of them teaching about these things and making space for Indigenous research methodologies to be utilized in spaces like education and child welfare and public health, that just continues to create space and pave the way for them to take on the next set of challenges. And I like the other panelists have said, we learn so much from our young people, and that's inspiring and gives me hope that they're just going to be able to take what we've done in our careers just to the next level. And as long as we have people standing with us and asking the questions, understanding who are the Indigenous people that live in your communities or that lived in your communities, and ask questions of why you no longer see their presence there, or if you see their presence there, how can you be a good ally and make sure that the systems that you engage with are lifting them up along the way. We need that.
So Deana actually perfectly set me up for my next question, which was, in your work, what is it that you most need, whether it's resources, understanding, something else, for your work and your community to thrive? And Joe, I'm going to start with you.
We need the established systems to eat a big slice of humble pie and take a back seat and allow us to lead. I think what we find is that what we're proposing and what we've been talking about here is viewed, and oftentimes in certain circles, as very threatening to the established status quo and to the power systems that are already in place. Our teachings have led us into a mindset where we believe we are interrelated, not only amongst the human species, but with the winged nation, the four-legged nation, and the crawling nation, and along with that, Mother Earth. Their counter to that is hyper-individuality and acquisition in a materialistic fashion. We believe we have been gifted with an overwhelming abundance, not only in natural resources, but in whatever we need to support our families and thrive. They are avatars of the scarcity mindset. And we believe that success is determined in a Lakota fashion about the Teoshbe, our chosen family by extension, our community. When they are healthy and thriving, when they are all succeeding, then success has been achieved. It cannot be matched and documented by individuals going forward. So when we propose a return to our belief systems, it is incredibly threatening to the established power systems. It is countervalent to what they want us to have happening in this country. And we believe that, the other thing I would add too is we believe we are here to live in harmony with Mother Earth, that we do not have dominion over her. And anybody who's been sweating it out this past summer, I think, is starting to realize that maybe we're onto something there. And so what we need is the public, these systems to realize that they are no longer driving this conversation anymore, nor should they be. They let us into the ditch. It's time for them to hand the keys over to somebody else. We may need them for certain things that we find fitting. There may be, techniques, applications that we would like to appropriate into the new paradigm that we are creating. But I think Deana hit it on the head. The answers, that's the good news. The answers are already out there. We have them within our constituents. And it's not just the Indigenous perspective. Communities of color throughout are all saying the same things. We want our own applications of how to do school in alignment with our views, our culture, our language. We want to be able to lift up our young people in a way that we believe is most beneficial to sustain our culture and not lose it to some dominant culture that doesn't reflect our value systems. So we're doing it out of an existential crisis. We happen to be the first ones through the wall, but there's a lot more coming with us, and we're here to help and lean into it and show the way for others to follow.
Yeah. Jessica, you talked about connectedness, but I'm wondering if there's anything else that you would name as something that you think is really, really needed to kind of move the needle and to help your community thrive.
I think my hope and prayer for all of us and for future generations is that we all know who we are and where we come from. Again, truly at the core of our being, beyond all the social constructs, beyond all the false beliefs out there. I recall my daughter's painting that she made for me that says, "Love comes from the light inside." She was teaching me how to heal my broken heart, heal the trauma and the pain. I feel like all of us, we've all experienced trauma and challenges, and each of our work on healing, on reconnecting, on knowing who we are, it has a ripple effect. And as you do your work, as I do mine, we're all going to help the collective be healthy and well. And when the collective is healthy and well, so are we individually. So it's that reciprocal relationship. It's about coming back in right relationship again and having that relationality guide all of our work and our practices and systems and everything that we do.
Yeah. Deana?
I think, I mean, similarly, my child inspires me. I have a son with very long, curly, beautiful hair. And I live in Oklahoma on Cherokee Nation. I live in a place where my son still gets asked a lot of questions about his hair, gets teased about it. Does he have a wig? And he's at that age, he's 8, where he's feeling like, oh, well, Mom, I don't wear that shirt unless we're going to a powwow because it says something about a powwow on it, or, you know. And so recognizing that he's 8 and we live in our tribal jurisdictional area in the state of Oklahoma on Cherokee Nation lands, and he's still confronting these things where he's not feeling like he can be who he is and who he's affirmed to be as a Cherokee and Lakota boy at home, like he can only be it in that space. I want him to feel comfortable and safe everywhere he goes and to be proud, see his language, see his community, see positive representations of him everywhere. And, you know, I need my community to stand up and do that with me. And those are Native and non-Native people alike. So yeah, that's my hope, is that he can go everywhere he wants to go and feel proud of who he is.
You know, I'm really struck by how much the conversation we're having resonates with the conversation we just had, resonates with the readings, resonates with the conversation that happened before my 2 panels. But, you know, I'm edified because we're saying a lot of the same things, and those things are that you need to trust communities to know what they need, that the knowledge and understanding of who a community is and what they need already exists, and that we as a society just need to support each other and dismantle and disrupt. We're in the disruption section in case you guys didn't get there. The systems that exist now to give and to empower people and their communities to do the work that they need to do to be healthy, to thrive, and to create a generation that doesn't have to go through the same traumas as the generations before them. So I just wanted to name that because I'm personally feeling very edified, and amazing work, VisionX team and the Zen team, putting that all together. Thank you so much to our panel for being here and sharing your work.